It's reported that over 20 million people worldwide downloaded this third-person shooter, and 3 years later, it looks like there's only a few hundred people that still play it. And that's despite the attention it received from both MrBeast and Dr. Disrespect. But let's delve into the epic tale and the downfall of Rogue Company and 10 reasons why it all went wrong. Rogue Company was announced on the 5th of September 2019, and First Watch Games teased some early alpha footage and announced some of their early playable characters, known as rogues. And I think it's fair to say that on the face of it, it ticked a lot of boxes. The art style was unique and the game was produced in Unreal Engine 4, so it basically looks stunning. The game was initially announced as an Epic Games exclusive, but also launched on all systems such as Xbox, PlayStation, and the Nintendo Switch. And there was a lot of upset brought to Switch users a bit later on, but we'll get to that. When the game entered early beta in July 2020, it was generally well received from critics, with Game Reactor quoting this statement: "The title has simple enough mechanics, tight, great feeling gunplay, and characters unique enough to keep the gameplay feeling fresh. Sure, it wasn't without its flaws, but for a title that is looking to be around for the long run, Rogue Company is definitely showing early signs of what could be greatness." And it would appear that Game Reactor was correct on a few things, but also they were wrong when mentioning the distance this game would go. But some of you might find this a little bit surprising, especially when I mention some of the collaborations and exposure that Rogue Company got. Early on, collaborations for this game brought the right attention to it, and I believe it was a big contributor why 20 million people downloaded the game. And first of all, 100 Thieves. Rogue Company teamed up with one of the biggest orgs to bring 4 unique skins, some weapon wraps, and a jetpack, all which featured the 100 Thieves logo and the red, white, and black branding. Even Nadeshot himself revealed himself under the mask of Dima. But unfortunately, even with 100 Thieves posting this on their YouTube channel, it only amounted to 66,000 views. But to continue their momentum, Rogue Company had bigger sights, and they focused their attention on the two-time himself, Dr. Disrespect. A collaboration that probably was worthwhile, as his upload to YouTube alone has amounted to 887,000 views. But Rogue Company went further this time than what they did with the 100 Thieves collaboration. Not only did they bring the Dr. Disrespect skin to the game, which I must say looked fantastic, they gave him a bunch of wicked voice lines, the cool dancer mode that he does, but on top of everything, he got his own map, the arena. Now, it did come with some flaws, like this was one of the maps that you just always gave you frame drops, but my word, did it look fantastic. You had the arcade, the gym, the branding everywhere, and I think they did an amazing job. But this is where I think Rogue Company ultimately pumped a lot of resource into their game early on, and that would later affect the future success of it. Not only this, but Rogue Company also teamed up with MrBeast. But unlike the other two, his video got 20 million views. But of course it did, it's MrBeast. But ultimately, I guess what I'm saying, after these 3 collaborations, Rogue Company really should have been given the exposure it ultimately needed to get people into the game. But unfortunately, the game failed to keep players playing. Now, being a creator and a Rogue Company partner for over 2 years, I'm pretty well placed within the community to give these reasons why I think Rogue Company did so badly, retaining both old and new players. Where better to start than one of Rogue Company's biggest criticisms? When the game first launched, it was very much branded a third-person tactical shooter, with extra emphasis on the tactical element. Each rogue had access to 6 perks and a choice of 2 weapons, which meant as you progressed through a game mode, such as Demolition, you had had to make some tactical choices, like whether you wanted to buy a piece of utility, or invest in some stronger perks. This, in my opinion, borrowed some key elements from games like Counter-Strike to really add some depth to each round. You actually had to be strategic with your purchases, as some of the perks would act as a perfect counter to some of the rogue picks on the other team, and some utility would also help you with various tactics. But this seemingly willing formula all got lost after a very action-packed year 1, which introduced 6 new rogues, a bunch of brand new maps, and new gameplay features. And it's these features that many would argue when Rogue Company took a turn for the worst. It set its standards very high, probably almost too high, to the point where these updates set a precedent. It's what all of its fans expected in future years, and simply Rogue Company never delivered that level of content again. It introduced a weapon mastery system which the more casual player may have welcomed. In fact, I did, as it meant I could continue making content for the game. And what this system allowed me to do is that you could use any AR and SMG on that rogue once you had mastered them weapons. But there's a downside to this. It introduced the constant need for weapon balancing, and that introduced a lot of new metas, which in the comp scene it made it a little bit boring to watch at times, as all the pros would abuse the meta weapons to the point where they had to actually get together and ban them as a gentleman agreement. And that's simply because they were never balanced properly in the first place. At least in the original launch version of the game, you picked rogues based on their abilities. Like for example, you picked Dima if you needed a breacher on your team, Talon if you needed intel, Saint if you needed reviving, or Dahlia, and the list goes on. But it would be unfair to say that Hi-Rez at least didn't try with the comp scene. So credit where it's actually due. Hi-Rez invested in their comp scene. I mean, they even put on some lands. I mean, they already had a success with another one of their titles, Smite, and they obviously envisioned similar success for Rogue. The only issue was, Rogue never really attracted any top teams into the game, which meant even at one point I funded my own team to compete, and we didn't win, which is a huge shame. But this shows a big indication as to why the decision was made to later terminate the comp scene altogether. It simply probably wasn't generating any money for them. Now, if I'm being honest, they could have kept the original format of the game and invested even more in the comp scene. But honestly, none of that would have really mattered because there was always moans and groans from the community about their servers. Now, there always seemed to be issues with the servers, and some regions were worse than others, for example, like the Middle East. And although that didn't directly affect me, in my region, for example, in the EU, you always felt your game stuttering in some way. And not only this, you often experience weird frame drops with like certain maps. Now, I don't know if this was a consequence of poor coding or if this was partly because other high-res titles were made in Unreal Engine 3 and this was their first attempt of using Unreal Engine 4. But what I do know, if you are trying to create a tactical third-person shooter, you're going to immediately affect a lot of players with server issues and put them off. In fact, put simply, if you downloaded this game and your first experience is a bad one, it would be a contributing factor as to why you'd maybe close the game down and never play it again. Just go back to other shooters like Counter-Strike or Valorant. Which leads perfectly onto my next issue, matchmaking. When the game first launched, it lacked a ranked feature, which for some of the more hardcore players that wanted to dip their toe into a third-person genre, this may have been a reason not to continue to play the game in the first place. But even after its launch, matchmaking again has always been a problem. And to be fair, I don't think the studio were completely to blame for this. The game lacked a consistent player base wanting to play ranked modes, which meant new players often got placed against veterans of the game, and again, deterred players away. I think maybe if the game launched with a ranked playlist and leaderboards, then the game could have had a lot more success. However, that success would hinge on solving and fixing a lot of the groundbreaking bugs, some of which have managed to last since the game first launched, such as trenches, invisible barbed wire. And then there was an issue with skins not showing in the game for no particular reason. Then you had the issue with private matchmaking with the constant crashing as you couldn't have a spectator, to even systems like the Switch that had issues with crashing and all sorts of other issues. To recently, I see there was a bug where it automatically changes the weapon for you, even if you're like mid gunfight. Now, touching back on the Switch issue, Hi-Rez later decided to stop support for the Switch, which meant isolating a whole bunch of players of which poured hard-earned money into supporting the game. And I think that left a bad taste in a lot of their mouths, which, if I'm being honest, is completely understandable. Now, this next point is probably a lot more noticeable, seeing as the game was announced to kind of go in maintenance mode even though that's not an official statement. But the lack of communication from the studio, especially on their X account, has been so lackluster. They have failed to address key issues with the game on when new updates may arrive, and this has been particularly evident over the last year. Now, speaking of lack of communication, there has also been a lot of disappointment with the frequency and the quality of the updates, such as new maps, new rogues, and especially cosmetics. In fact, in the last 2 years, we've only seen 2 new rogues in Duke and Vivi, and maps, well, we did get an updated High Castle and Canals, but they kind of completely went against the traditional 3-lane maps that made the game so appealing from the start, and again adding to their switch from a more tactical to a more casual feel. Now, I do think Rogue Company existed through a time where the gaming industry suffered a huge unfortunate turn where thousands of jobs were lost. And let's be honest, a lot of these amazing employees were the heart and soul behind the game and a huge driving force behind it in the first place. We also don't know if the game tried to re-establish its audience to a more broader market to continue to keep investing in it and to some extent save it. That is of course information that we'll never be privy to, but one thing is for sure: their attempt to make Rogue Company Elite a mobile version of the game that saw ex-pro Scott Gandy take the reins from the main game to this one now seems to have disappeared from the face of the earth. And who knows what resources were poured and ultimately wasted on the attempt to appeal to the mobile market. I do think that the team behind Rogue Company made a lot of bad decisions that ultimately led to the failure of the game, but I have to be completely honest to say that this game will always have a very fond place in my heart. For the gaming experience, for the people I've connected with, but also very thankful for the platform it helped me build. To connect with some of you out there that watch me all through my Rogue Company journey. Now, if you want to help me reach my goals of 100,000 subscribers, then can I ask you to do this one thing for free for me? If you could like the video and press subscribe, then you can help me achieve my childhood dream. But who knows what Rogue has planned for the future? One thing's for sure, I hope their intellectual property does not go to waste. There are some amazing rogues, guns and maps in this game that I think if you get the right team behind it, I think Rogue could make a huge splash in the water and return stronger than ever.